I recently joined to the GWT team, but I have been working on GWT libraries and frameworks inside Google for the last 3 years since I joined. So what I am planning is, I'm not planning to give a real talk, but I want it to be more discussion, especially on the scope side. We already started the discussion yesterday. So for the roadmap part, I want to discuss why we are putting them into the roadmap, why we offered, why we decided to put them on the, propose them on the roadmap, and how we're gonna move forward in some areas. So one of the items was in the roadmap is to refresh the UI development. I guess. So we would like to refresh the UI development, especially more around the UI binder part. So the UI binder is, there are very good stuff about UI binder. They are declarative, and people usually, in general, like declarative way of representing the UIs. So it's based on the surveys. It's very popular outside of Google. Also inside Google, it's very popular way of developing UIs. So it reduces some boilerplate, especially with the widget hierarchies and so on. And but the problem or the limitation of the UI binder is it's static. So it's not a real templating system. It's mostly you are representing a static layout of the view, and this is usually becomes more and more problem when your UI becomes more dynamic. Then you can represent less in the UI binder side, and you need to do more programming style of UI development. One of the reasons of this is also designed as a helper to the widget class. It wasn't like a first-party thing. You have a UI binder interface, you need to bind towards a previous class. You cannot, you need to use composites. You cannot have by default the same type as top type of the UI binder. And for example, if you need to replicate a section of the template, you need to define another UI binder, but you cannot define that UI binder. You cannot refer to that UI binder template directly. You need to define a widget class for that. Now, when you define a widget class, you need to extend composite, and a composite will not expose the default APIs if it's a panel, and you start putting delegate methods and so on. So at the end, for simple reuse of a template, you end up writing out of code. So that's one of the things that we can improve on that side. So another part about the UI development is interoperability. So if we're gonna improve the UI development, one of the things we want to do is to minimize of this impact when we switch from a basic widget to a more fancy one in a third-party library. So if we have a select or button or anything else, currently we don't have generic abstractions for this kind of widgets. So it means that if the vendor or the developer of the widget didn't follow closely the API of the with proper widget, then it means that it's going to be a lot of work to simple, but a lot of work to convert your code to the new widgets. So this was one of the problems also we were having inside the Google, because we also have our own widget system that we internally use. And in our case, we had a big teaming change on the Google side, and now we need to develop our own widgets, and sometimes they were not fully following the APIs, and that means it's a lot of work on the other people's side. So especially if you are writing a common code that, for example, let's say you are developing a form, then you don't really care if the combo box is a GWT combo box, or if text box is a GWT text box. You just want an input field there, you just want a selection field there, and ideally for a lot of this kind of UIs, the switch can be just seamless from different uses. And another important part about this is we would like to have more easier use of other sources of widgets like Clojure. In our case, we have a lot of Clojure widgets as already. And also there are other JS libraries that provide widgets. So we would like to have this kind of interoperability less painful on the UI development side.
No, that one.
So what we are planning is currently we're gonna start working on it this quarter, and a solution is gonna be very likely based on web components. And if you haven't heard about it, I strongly encourage you to look at some of the presentations on previous Google I/O, and also especially in the Google I/O there will be another sessions on web components in this year. So it's a very hot topic. It's a bleeding edge. But if you're going to refresh our UI development, then it means that we need to project something that will be more future-proof. So for that reason, we are targeting perhaps not immediate release, but an eventual migration to an idle form. So on the other hand, although it's bleeding edge, currently we will see about that in the Google I/O sessions, but the standard is divided into the specs, and so each one of these specs or features are currently can be handled by polyfills. So even the browser doesn't support them natively. We can bring this kind of development into current modern browsers. We are not targeting old browsers. So that's another part. So by following the spec, that means we also will not be bringing a monolithic new widget system. Instead, by the way, these are just planned. The work will be more open, but this is what's in my mind right now. So it's not going to be a monolithic widget system that we gonna bring in, and it will not be like take it or leave it. It will be more of several features around UI development that will make it easy to build a new widget system on top of it. So you can still use some of these features without going full with the new UI system. And the process will be, as I said, open. So as soon as we have something, a reasonable starting point, I will be releasing it as a third-party library, and then we can iterate over it with the feedback, and you guys can start contributing. And at the end, again, we are not targeting I want it to be mature enough before going into the SDK, if we gonna do that. So that means it will be evolving outside of SDK, so that we will be more flexible on with designing some of the pieces we don't like, and then after it becomes more mature with the specs, because specs are so currently moving, we can put it part of the SDK. And this is important because our widget system is designed in the time where there were no common widget abstraction in the UI, in the HTML world. With the web component stuff, we have now opportunity to follow a more common standard than invent our own widget system. So check out the sessions in this year's Google I/O. So that's gonna be plenty of talk about this. So another thing was the RPC refresh. So this is so we talk about this. I don't need to go much on this, but GWT RPC is a good start. It works for a project that starts from scratch, but after a while it feels short for many projects. And two common scenarios not covered well in GWT RPC is if you already have a server, or if there's a third-party server that's out there, and if you want to talk with it, then you cannot use GWT RPC. GWT RPC uses proprietary protocols, and it needs to be GWT aware. So also we would like, I think the solution should be supporting multiple clients. So if this is a common scenario. If you are developing a server, then very likely your only client will not be a web client. It can be an Android client. It can be a client written by native JS, or even in the future it might be Dart. So if we gonna have a second RPC system, then it should be following these requirements, covering these requirements. So what is the problem with the request factory? So how many people use request factory? 2, 3. How many people are still using request factory? Okay, so 1, 2. So that's the problem. So I had the same problem. I tried that, and we were using GWT RPC. Then we were planning to put another RPC system internally. Then I looked through GWT RPC, the request factory, and I didn't understand. And in a short time. So it means that the entry level for it is very high. So this is a major problem. And if you, on the other hand, if you look at how many people looked at REST GWT, so if you guys have seen that API is straightforward. You define an interface. You use GSR annotations to define your RPC API, and use DTOs, and everything works. This small library, it does the job. So something like, I'm not saying it needs to be directly like that, but it's something, if you're going to replace request factor with something else inside GWT, it needs to be following a similar, very basic approach that provides JSON-based simple RPC solution that a lot of projects can start using.
In your mind, what's wrong with AutoBeans?
AutoBeans also is a heavyweight API. I mean, if you look at the AutoBeans, I mean,
the current implementation is super bloated, 700% larger than GWT RPC. It does not generate efficient code at all. It is nice and simple in terms of don't repeat yourself, but it generates super efficient code.
Right, that's something we could change, because from a user perspective, AutoBeans is really great. You just define your DTOs using Java interfaces, they're almost done.
Not exactly. When you start using AutoBeans, you need to create them from a specific factory. You need to call edit on top of them. It provides APIs to make it work well with the editor framework and request factory. But it's not like a simple DTO system where I don't need to, I can just give methods there and start using them. I don't need to use a bean factory and call edit on top of them, call properties on top of them.
Well, these are two separate issues anyway, because the one issue is basically the RPC mechanism, the other is the serialization standard. I mean, you could have REST GWT, but use protobus, for example, instead of tunnel them in JSON. There's many different JSON serializers out there. AutoBeans is one of them, but there's JSON. There's like a ton of them that serialize Java objects to JSON. So we could decide on different JSON serialization implementation.
That's also meaningful.
Plus, like I just looked up REST GWT. It's also another JAX WRS implementation. So now there's like 3 of them that I know about.
So yeah, that's one of the things. So people are outside developing this stuff. That means
Yeah. It would be nice that if whatever annotations and types that are used were kind of standard. Like for example, like if we decided on JAX WRS, then you can plug in 3 different JAX WRS implementations. It doesn't matter because the actual code that basically defines the interfaces looks the same everywhere. It's just the bootstrapping of it that's different.
Yeah. So also there's 2 parts. So one part is again, if we are developing our client independent of server, it needs to be a reasonable way of developing it. And the second scenario is, what if we are the owner of both server and client? Then it means you have more options to reuse stuff. Then it means we can optimize even more on that direction. So this alternative may or may not replace GWT RPC, just but something that we definitely need. So if we I'm going to talk about that on scope. So on the mobile space, so we talk about the mobile web and hybrid applications, and we have a good story on that part. But I think one of the things that is not explored enough and not discussed enough is the real native application. So the GWT is designed as sharing code between client and the server. But the opportunities of sharing code between the server, between the client and the client, it means like sharing code between Android and web is there's an even higher opportunity to reuse code there compared to sharing the code with the server. And this is a very common scenario, especially in Google. You can see a lot of projects that are going through this flow, and when you are going with native applications, which a lot of companies are trying to do right now. They are releasing, they have native Android application, native iOS application, and they have web application, desktop application, and so on. But with the GWT in this case, it has a huge potential. It can understand it can convert Java code for the website, and there are other solutions for the Objective-C where you can convert Java code to Objective-C and so on. So a company can easily build a stack on Java technologies that is utilizing GWT. So I think we should leverage our unique position in this part. So you will see more and more products that are going to be based on this stack in the upcoming years, but I think there's still things to do, and especially if you talk about RPC, and that's one of the reasons. So you cannot, if you're gonna reuse RPC mechanisms on client and server, and if you go with the GWT SDK now, you have only request factory. But if you are developing a basic web client, the basic client, then request factory has too much boilerplate. So the reflection, the reason we put the reflection is there's a huge demand, and we were hesitant to do it before because of the additional code load in the final JavaScript. But even we are not doing that, people are starting to add reflection-like features into the GWT, and whatever people are followed there is going to be a need for selective enablement of the reflection. So for example, we are going to need to choose which classes we are with for which methods and for which fields we want reflection information. And also we're going to need to choose what kind of data we want in the reflection. So it might be modifiers, accessors, perhaps types information, depending on what is requested by the developer. So we cannot just put everything out there. So it means that we need to provide this kind of configuration. And this can be done with annotations or GWT XML. But when this happens, we don't want people to diverge from a common solution. If you don't do that, then people will develop their own annotations, their own XML files, and so on. So it's a good example where we can include something in the SDK by SDK to prevent divergence and to help ecosystem. So, and this goes to the scope part. So we started talking about this yesterday, and so currently there are some disagreements, I guess, especially in more gray areas. And we cannot have a bulletproof way of saying this needs to be part of SDK, this shouldn't, for some cases. But we can have some common understanding on making decisions on the future. So apart from what is inside in the SDK, I think we should decide what should be inside of the SDK, and after that we can eventually reach that point. Currently, I think this is my personal opinions on the scope of the SDK. I think the SDK should include minimal set to make a working web application. That means you need to have a simple RPC system, you need to have a DOM APIs, a widget system, and so on. But of course, a project grows from there. They can need more features and they can start looking for other libraries. Another place that makes sense to put on the GWT SDK is anything that's standard in JDK. If something like logging is a good example. So logging is a standardized JDK API. So if we need to provide the logging feature, it makes sense to put it on the SDK as an emulation of the JDK logging system. So the third thing is when we think a divergence in the GWT world that can harm the ecosystem. In that case, it would make sense to put it on the SDK to be more standard-based. So this is funny. I don't have a good example for GWT SDK for that, but in the JDK, the GSR annotations are a good example. GSR annotations are baked into the SDK so that people can write a common code that are based on these annotations, and it will work independent of the dependency injection system. And the last one, I think, this is the more gray area when we want most of the people to do something in a specific way. If we really want most of the people to go something like activities framework, then it can be on the SDK, but it's more gray area, and we need to be sure that it fulfills the needs of most of the people, and it's really what we want from people to go with. So these are my opinions on the scope part. So I think it's good to hear what you guys think in general for the scoping. We started discussion yesterday, and there were different opinions. It's good to talk about it here because it's gonna be more talk on the less face-to-face talk on later, that we need to make decisions one by one. So it's good to have some common understanding on what is going on. So, any opinions?
I really like what you said yesterday about the litmus test for what we put in is you know, the homework assignment sort of example, right? Of it's silly, right? In terms of like, you know, we don't want our sole customer of GWT to be like some kid doing a homework assignment, but it is a very good example of, you know, the really cuts it down to the core of what needs to be in there and leave everything else out. I think that makes sense. I like that.
Yeah, the thing is when we get more opinionated, so if you put more APIs, that means you are getting more opinionated on how people will work with GWT. And when we do that, it's a very difficult job. It's a difficult job because there are a lot of different projects with different needs. And if you end up putting a solution there that doesn't fit a lot of projects, then it means people will start hitting issues, and then it will harm Grid. So it was. We had a similar issue in my previous project where we jumped into the activities framework, and then shortly after it didn't go. So it means we end up in a state where some of our code converted into the activities framework, some of our code wasn't, and we couldn't move forward. So this is, I don't want to select activity, especially activity also doing some stuff very good. So, but I think it makes sense to have them as a third-party library and describe to people when it's good for them to use that library. So that people can say, oh, if I have this kind of application, this will work well for me, so I can use it. I can go with it.
It kind of seems like there's three levels of things in GWT, right? There's like the GWT core stuff, which is everything has to have it, even if you're running games or whatever. And then there's like the I don't know what good words for it are, like, so you've got core, and then you've got something else which is like like the widgets and that sort of stuff that like almost everybody's going to use. And then you've kind of got the really optional stuff like request factory and other things that we might want to come up with, another RPC system or something like this. This seems like on the website or something like this we could differentiate between these of okay, here's your core stuff, here's your you using this is really safe, everybody really uses it, and here's the stuff that like you can evaluate it and we maintain it and release it and it's great, but it's not like every single app needs to use these.
So it is not practical to think that GWT SDK can provide a full, perfect enterprise stack or mobile stack. I think it's for example, GWT is doing it in a very good way, but it will evolve in time. A library when it's outside, it has more options to evolve than something that's baked into SDK. We cannot really evolve GWT RPC because we have a lot of customers using GWT RPC, and it has specific behaviors and people ask for additional behaviors on top of it. But when something is outside it can evolve more naturally, and it can be easier for us to say that, oh, if you are gonna be needing this feature, you can use the older version of this library. It's much harder to do that for an SDK. We cannot say, oh, you cannot go through the 3.0 because, well, there can be exceptions, but in general, we cannot say that. We're gonna cut these features from GWT RPC in the next release. So if you need them, then you need to start with the older version.
Well, I think we do have the chance to actually get rid of some of the technical debt we accumulated over the years with 3.0. There's a unique chance in a year.
Yes. So this is the reason I said, especially we cannot do it always.
This is something we can do every couple of years. This is not something we can do like every 6 months.
And GWT is due. It's been long enough.
But one thing we can do is we can still. It still makes sense to point people to the right direction. Even it's not part of the SDK, it makes perfect sense to say there is GWT and use this stuff. GWT provides you these features. Go ahead and use that if you want to develop a mobile application. So it makes sense to do those kind of stuff. But
I mean, there are some things that every web application must have in it, no matter what language is written in, no matter, like, for example, web applications by definition use the cloud. So by definition, you have to have some kind of server communication mechanism. And if you just survey basically the field, I mean, you can have a totally offline application, but unless it's a game, you're not going to be doing much if you can't talk to the cloud. And so, probably 99.9% of all the web applications in the world basically use like JSON to communicate with the server now. I mean, not supporting JSON basically is like an out-of-the-box thing that almost kind of dictates that you can't write the server in Python or in Go or in any of the other languages that people like to use on the server, PHP. I mean, you can, but it doesn't make it an easy decision. You have to specifically like go and find So like having something like, JAX RS, which is a standard Java technology, as part of it, I would argue that one actually is part of like the homework assignment. Because like by default, you need to be able to make a servlet request that passes some,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
you can build more elaborate RPC stuff on top of that if you want to, right? But
Yeah.
We need to provide some base. I mean, the very low DOM level APIs are not perfect. I mean, we can just provide DOM request builder.
yeah. I mean, you could say you would roll your own and use XHR, like request builder, right? But then the thing is, then everybody who's ever doing a homework assignment is basically writing a serializer for request builder. Yeah.
So I think the balance is that people need to have a good starting point, and after that it would make sense for them to look out for third-party libraries. If you have an SDK where people develop a little bit thing, but even for doing something basic, if they end up going to other libraries, that's not a good sign. Especially it's not a good impression to the people. It will hardly be.
Yeah, we want to be batteries included.
So if we provide solutions that are heavy rate, then people will look into that, will spend hours, days, weeks on it, and they will not be able to do basic stuff in a reasonable way. Then it will harm the SDK again. So that, I guess, the balance in that. So we can use that as a reference point on deciding what needs to go in SDK. Also, another thing that's related to this scope is we want to keep even something that needs to be on the SDK, we want them to be developed as third-party libraries, so that it can evolve outside of the SDK. Then we can start bringing it back to the SDK. It gives more option to iterate. Also, it doesn't give the long impression to people, so that they can start using it. It's currently, if you look at the SDK, there are a lot of experimental APIs that are marked as experimental, and they are not evolved enough. But people started using it and they are stuck. So if you look at the SDK, there's a lot of classes like that. So that doesn't work in practice. So we need to keep evolving these libraries as third-party libraries. Then when they are mature enough, they will be baked into the SDK, and we will be announcing 2 more libraries in the Google I/O session, where especially one of them it makes sense to include in the SDK, but we want it to be evolving outside. So it's already used internally, but it's good to see the feedback from the outside, and if it really works for everybody, then we can back into the SDK. So I think for the stuff I will be working on, that's my plan. I will be not putting it into the SDK, but for UI development, it will be an outside project that.
So do you see it still going? This is perhaps. Do you see it still going through Garrett and code reviews and this sort of stuff, or is it just going to be on some?
I think we are flexible at that point. Whatever provides the quickest iterations.
I think what we should be doing at least is like modernize it as well, so people can really easily use it.
Yeah.
That's, because internally at Google, we frankly don't care about Maven. We got our own build system, so doing that would be a high burden on everyone else outside.
Yeah.
Has anyone used Wicket before?
Sorry?
Wicket, W-I-C-K-E-T.
Yep.
Yeah, I use that. That's mostly a server-side framework.
Yeah, I played with it a little bit. It's been a couple of years since I did anything with it. One of the main issues I had at the time when trying to get my head around it, even having used it before, was, okay, what jar do I need to add to get this functionality? So I add a jar, and that one has other stuff, add a jar, add a jar, add a jar, and you end up with, in Maven even, these long list of dependencies to include every single piece. Which is one concern I have right off the bat of getting into that position where we've got, okay, no longer Gwt user, Gwt dev, Gwt servlet, but each of the individual components. Start with core, build our way out. Maybe only do the explicit dependencies and have it work its way back automatically. Maven's nice like that. And then just one other remark. In having these separate sort of satellite projects that are adding new pieces of functionality, the incubator project, and remember the Gwt incubator stuff?
Yeah.
People are still picking that up and saying, oh, well, that's nice. These are new things that are working their way in. And they pick that up and they use CSS resource, and that clobbers the existing CSS resource code and breaks existing pieces. Because we've got no way of saying, hey, by the way, this is long, long dead. It is long since been moved in pieces no longer work.
We got a way of actually saying that.
Yeah.
We may have said that recently. Okay, it's possible, but it's
So
been dead for a long
We
time.
can actually do that, clear communication on that through the homepage. We can even put the maybe coordinates on the homepage, so it's just a copy and paste for people who actually want to use it.
We just need to be very clear about a lot of these pieces.
Okay.
Here is where you go exactly. Here's what you need, and this is no longer supported.
Yeah, we can simply even deprecate those. Because if they get from the
Clearly
old
state.
library, they will be deprecated.
Yeah.
Don't use it. If you want to use it, and if you want to break
Delete all the
something,
source code.
that's
Delete all the source code.
That's awesome.
The remark is more, we haven't done this well in the past.
You can do with JSON, Doug Crocker did with JSON 2.js. Basically, everybody on the whole internet with business source scripting, like JSON 2.js from like his website. And he always incented people who actually have made a copy of it because it's kind of insecure, because he can just pass the security hole into it and steal everybody's stuff. So he actually passed his library, like do like a windowed out alert or something, so everyone's app broke basically one day.
Nice.
They learned their lesson. It was like, make a copy of this, clone it.
Well, I don't know how it's actually going to work through the homepage. It's going to actually decide if we want to promote a certain library, but that's something that basically the Twit steering committee has to do.
Yes.
I guess.
Yes, so I think it's the steering committee's responsibility to
Say
find
it.
people on the side.
That library is
Point
mature
B.
now. It's well maintained. We can encourage people using that.
Yeah. Cool.
So I don't know how much time do we actually have left.
I don't know.
Bashkir's out the room. Nobody's.
He said 11:30, take a break.
11:30. So, what do you guys actually think of deprecating IE8 as well with 3.0? Because this is like one of the biggest pain points. If we can get rid of this one, IE8.
See,
I
we have to work
would
next week, bro.
assume Google has good numbers on usage of i6, 7, and 8.
Actually, we have a different position than outside.
So we have corporate customers that are on IE, and we already take the tack within our project that if you want to stay with the legacy browser, then you're going to have to stay with the legacy version of our framework. But we've been pretty aggressive, like our UI and stuff like that. It's like we're using HTML5 specific features and stuff, like the way that we look up like the data fields and stuff like that. We haven't even tried to make it backwards compatible. There's like no effort being put into that.
My reason behind it is that Microsoft is actually going to drop Windows XP support about this time next year.
Yeah.
So there's no way of actually running an
Yeah.
IE8 supported out of the
This
box.
this came up
but
in the
on
steering committee, and I forget. We had
Yeah.
fairly.
Well, XP is not going to be supported by Microsoft
But they-
anymore.
Concrete
so
decision
we
about it.
actually have in the box. IE8.
What was the?
They still because they stopped supporting it doesn't mean people aren't running.
But
Yeah.
I think most of the customers who stuck with IE8, I think enterprise customers, and they will not be using Canon support.
Yeah, that's
I don't expect that.
that.
There will be still people, but I would expect that number to go down much quicker.
So yeah,
Maybe Mike's approach is right to say with 2.x is something you can still use with IE8. So we can throw all that stuff
Yeah,
into the
what was
widget library, that's just making sure that we don't have memories. We can get rid of that.
Unless we're going to maintain a maintenance branch on i2x or Web2x, then people who needed to support IE8 would have no option, because if they use that older version, they wouldn't be supporting the newer version.
Yeah, I think the decision was to use a maintenance branch.
yes.
Yeah.
I really think we should. I mean, I think for a project like Gwit, I think for it to retard its forward progress by always
Well,
saying we got to keep this legacy stuff around like from now until like Kingdom comes. It's a really bad thing. I mean, it makes it really hard to pay down like technical debt. Like people were talking about before. It makes it really hard to sort of think about like how to integrate new paradigms and what's happening and how to be dynamic with like the market. And so like we do that now. Like we do that now. We tell customers like, look, you have 2.3, and we just want to tell you right now that we're dropping X, Y, and Z support in version 3, and that's just that. I mean, you guys can continue to pay for your subscription for 5 years, and we'll patch security bugs, and if you find bugs, we'll apply bug fixes and stuff. But we're not going to support like X, Y, and Z in 3.0, and we just want you to know that. It's just not going to be there.
Well, if we were making a commitment that yes, we will update new browsers in the branch, then I think that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But as a counterpoint, back when we did with Voices That Matter, I think 2009, we had a ton of enterprise developers there. And we had people who were like panicking that, oh, you're going to require Java 1.5. And it's been out for how long at that point? And finally it's like, okay, well, I can run 1.4 on my server and still use GWT with that. I'm okay with that.
So I don't remember the exact details, but I wish I could because it is terribly irrelevant. But this did come up on the steering committee, and we discussed it for quite a while, and it was basically. Sorry.
I pushed for that, but
Yeah.
I actually want to say something. I was surprised by Vaden's survey how many people are actually using a recent version of GWT. You're doing the survey when GWT 2.5 actually came out, and it turned out that a lot of people actually already moved from GWT 2.4 to 2.5. So basically, if the survey is
really aggressive in moving to the new version, but when we were asking about the browsers they need to support, so I actually have the numbers over here. So 54% of the GWT users were expected to support IE8 in 2013, and I think that they would be quite disappointed if we would be dropping us out support for IE8 in 3.0. So basically, these guys who are aggressively moving to the latest version of the GWT, I guess this is not going to drop into 0 in 1 year.
Well, about 3.0, we're talking about basically next I/O.
yeah, next year.
Next year.
I don't know. I think that by that time, it may not be an issue.
Maybe
So there's
what,
some power to
20%?
this too. Like there's another thing too. Like we're trying to encourage more community support, and we know that, like patches can be made. There can be third-party patches. People can. I mean, it would be really nice. Like we were talking about, if we had things like an AST transform API in 3.0, like theoretically, someone from the community could come along and start a GitHub that like maintains like IE8 support and GWT that we don't have to do.
Yeah, I think Colin was saying that before, that you guys would just make an add-on.
Right.
Maybe
We can do that to a degree, but with the CSS resource and the like, you've got all kinds of interesting issues because it's not replaced with. There's no way to do fallbacks because we've got these details that really do depend on you actually expecting it everywhere you write that code.
I mean, sure, I agree, but I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I think one of the exercises here though is still to to hopefully where there's a will, there's a way with this stuff. Like, I mean, look at Arai, for example. Like, we really only focus on Jetty and AS7. It's like all we focus on. And we've got like people running it on WebSphere and all this other stuff. And they come to us and we're like, no, we don't really have the resources to support it. And they're like, well, we really want to. And they're like, well, okay. And then they just like, they start developing it, right? There's like some GitHub repos that have like Arai integration for like Resin and like these other weird app servers.
I'm
and
still
stuff.
waiting for App Engine for it, by the way.
So someone has it working, by the way. It recently came to my attention that there is Arai App Engine support. There's like a special service.
Well,
From
I
our
just
perspective,
wanted
I
to say
think
we can always focus on old people like running on Java 1.4 and complaining about not supporting IE6. But actually having that technical depth actually leaves us out with a lot of new people.
6 is a lot different from 8, though. Dropping IE6 and 7, I think everyone just agrees pretty much unilaterally is very reasonable.
We say you're going to drop a 3.0 IE6 and 7.
What is the maintenance cost? What is the maintenance cost of IE?
I think we don't need to go and actively delete code right now. So it means that we will be more, we can keep widgets as it is right now, or the 3.0, and it means that it's going to be still somehow working for some people. So we don't need to go and actively delete the code.
Well,
I would argue differently, actually.
Yeah,
Can I argue that for a
I think the IE6 issue, there's a whole bunch of crap in the widgets just to deal with IE6.
Yeah.
And you would really want to delete all of that and perhaps even rework the event system. So you don't have to work on
Well, the layout panel stuff only exists that Joel created, only exists to make it work with IE6. He would have used a different technique for for native layout panels if
then-
he didn't have support ICs. I just wanted to interrupt though, because we are running 15 minutes late, and I don't want to cut too much into Johannes' time. He's scheduled to do a presentation at 11:30. Bhaskar said we should take a 15-minute break at 11:30. He can start 15 minutes later. So you guys can continue the discussion. Actually, I'm kind of worried that if I break it up now, you guys won't resume it later. Because it actually is a really important discussion. I hope it doesn't just get dropped on the floor. But some people probably need to use the bathroom maybe before he starts his next presentation. So
When does Vista get dropped?
I'm one of them.
Sorry?
When does Vista get dropped? Vista supports
There's only
IE8.
one. There's only one.
Yeah, I just checked.
Has, later.
But you can run IE9.
It can, true, but then again, XP can support IE8, but we still have people on IE6 for some ungodly reason.
Right, but you can't go above a.
Yeah, if we assume next summer that the instant that XP is dropped, everyone is off of it, and then we can move up to quit 3. That's that's not unreasonable.
Let's do the survey again somewhere in the fall.
Yeah.
And actually see how those numbers progress.
Well, how did the survey ask too? Because if you ask people, do you need to support IEA, you'll just say yes because it's no skin off.
Yeah, maybe we
your
need
back.
to ask that question like to
Can
different
you afford to
angles
lose
actually get a good idea about
Yeah,
that.
the question was about the kind of in Europe.
They've already deprecated IS7 in already.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the better question is how much.
Deprecated or doesn't support?
they don't support it with JQ.
Okay.
Or no.
So basically, like, they're a bigger library, growing faster, and they're able to.
Yeah, that's
a great-
Well,
That's
the
my
problem is a lot of
main
GWT applications are large legacy enterprise.
Have the same level of support for the browser.
So do we want to be the library that in fact have the library that does support modern browsing well, or do we want to be the library that grow
If you can phrase it differently as library which is long-term maintainable, it means the same thing, but the words are very different, and different organizations hear different things. Yeah.
Well, I mean, part of
Agreed.
the thing that's always
Except for there
confusing
is-
with the browsers is Microsoft doesn't support them. Why does everyone else? You know, I mean,
I
Do they
think
not support
we
IE8?
can take both
think
paths
there is.
because
well,
Trump
but like
takes
6
one
and 7 though.
and the branch takes the other one, right?
That's
I
maybe
mean,
middle ground. It's saying
if everybody-
maintain 2
Why would-
X
or-
per
yeah,
model.
if- if-
All of these
You
things
really
support
want the answer to that question?
Yeah,
Do they support
legacy
IE6 and
widgets
so on?
that support
No.
it, and the new